Now that we've gone through some of the cardiovascular system, we're going to talk about how things change when we start to exercise. So, taking a look, the main things that we will see change is that the autonomic nervous system will adjust itself in order to increase the cardiac output. It will also redistribute to different places in the body that cardiac output, and it will increase the extraction of oxygen by the working muscles. So, this is what we're going to take a look at throughout the next couple of videos. So, what exactly is oxygen consumption or VO2, which is the volume of extracted oxygen? It means essentially it's oxygen consumption. How much oxygen are we consuming throughout the activities that we're doing at that particular time? In reality, it is the best measure of cardiorespiratory fitness. So when we try to find out like how fit is someone, that's a very nebulous thing. Like how fast can they run, or is it how much, like what is it that they can do or how long they can go? Actually, it is oxygen consumption, VO2. That is our measure of fitness whenever we talk about it. And we have ways to be able to relate it to other people so you can determine whether one person is more fit than the other. So it really is this amount of oxygen that you're consuming during exercise or any activity that you're doing. It's typically reported in milliliters of oxygen consumed per minute per kilogram of body weight. So it's like mLs per kgs per minute. And you can use this comparison when you're looking at relative VO2, which is what this is in the milliliters per kilogram per minute, to compare people regardless of what their body size or gender is. So, no matter what their sex or gender or body size is, this will take a look at how much oxygen is being consumed relative to their body weight or their body mass. So we've got milliliters of oxygen per minute per kilogram of body weight. You can say it however you want to. It's usually milligrams per kilogram per minute. And this is the rate at which oxygen is being used to generate energy during our exercise. So it depends on quite a few different things. It's how well is the air brought into the lungs, how well your heart is working to be able to pump that oxygenated blood to the muscles, and then how well is your muscles utilizing this oxygen and then delivering it back up to the heart again to ultimately go to the lungs and pick up new, fresh, clean oxygen as we're going through it. So I'm going to show you a video of Lance Armstrong's trainer and taking a look at what is VO2 max. That's the maximum of VO2 consumption, and also lactate threshold.
If you're an endurance athlete, you really want to look at measurements around oxygen carrying capabilities. And that endurance athlete being a cyclist, triathlete, or runner, as the first measurements you want to get on an athlete in those sports. VO2 max and lactate threshold are the two tests to conduct. One, VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen you're consuming at the maximum intensity or workload you're putting out. And the more oxygen you consume, the greater work or intensity you can produce. So that's what VO2 max is. And those who have a greater VO2 max, or what we call aerobic engine, tend to do better in endurance events because they're able to utilize a lot more oxygen so they can ride faster, run faster, swim better, things like that. Lactate threshold is another test, and it measures the intensity that an athlete is producing, either in terms of watts or running pace, right at the point that you cross over from using your aerobic system to using your anaerobic energy system. And what you want to do is be able to stay below this threshold. So you're basically staying in an aerobic state the majority of the the time that you're racing. And if you can imagine, you know, if you've got a series of hills throughout the course of a stage, and if Lance is very well trained, his power at lactate threshold is very high, when he comes to the climbs, as opposed to his opponents, he's going to be, you know, staying below this threshold, staying aerobic, burning 2 types of fuel, fat and carbohydrate, and still being able to clear the lactic acid that's building up as his opponents hit these climbs and they start climbing. After about 10 minutes, they're going to get above their lactate threshold. That lactate is going to start to accumulate. It's not going to burn, it's not going to clear, it's going to start accumulating, and they'll be able to tolerate it and deal with it maybe for the first climb, the second climb, but come the third climb, it's going to be eventually a limiting factor for success for these guys that have gone above threshold early on the climbs, whereas Lance has been below threshold. Now when they get to this final climb to the finish, you know, the guys that have been above threshold trying to stay with Lance, and Lance has been below threshold, now he can accelerate, and he has all the means and has all the carbohydrate stores to maximize his energy returns on a summit finish.
All right, so how do we actually measure oxygen consumption? Well, there's different ways for us to be doing it. What we're going to talk about a lot in this class or in this series is looking at a metabolic cart measurement and actually getting full-fledged accurate readings when it comes to oxygen consumption. This is the most accurate way and a direct way to actually measure the gas concentrations that you are exhaling out, and comparing that to what's happening in room air to be able to give us actual readouts of oxygen that is being consumed. Typically, it requires a treadmill test or sometimes a bike test that lasts between 8 to 15 minutes. And it increases speed and grade, or the workload if you're on a bike, until you are completely exhausted. And we are talking like thorough exhaustion. You cannot go any further. Your body is giving out. So I'm going to show you a test right here that actually demonstrates a VO2 test happening in action.
My name's Mark Morrison. I'm the Senior Exercise Physiologist at the Human Performance Lab with Houston Methodist Orthopedics and Sports Medicine at Willowbrook. And welcome to the VO2 Max Test.
I'm Scott Anderson. I'm an elite athlete and I compete in the sport of triathlon. I am also a physician assistant at Houston Methodist Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. I work with Dr. Wong in the spine section of orthopedics. I'm here to do the VO2 max test. So the first thing we did once I got here was they took my height and weight and body fat measurements. We did 5 stages in the test, and after each stage they took a lactate level. The test started off at 4 miles an hour, and then the next stage went up. Now here's my final stage, an hour, then to 10 miles an hour, and then finally for the last stage it went up to 10.9 miles per hour. However, at every 30 seconds he increased the incline about 2%. So at the end there I was running about at 8% and at almost 11 miles an hour.
Okay, you've got a minute and a half left, okay? Can you do that? Okay, good. I think you're going to beat this kid. You're at 68. You're so close. This is a new record. You're so close. Just hang in there. Oh, almost. Okay. Oh, almost. Well done. That was awesome. Well done, Scott. That was fantastic. Okay, keep that mask on. I know you want to pull it off, but keep it on. Let me get a final blood sample. And then you are done. So we just need to get some recovery data, so keep that mask on. Awesome. That was a fantastic result. New record. You just wanted to beat that kid, didn't you?
Yeah.
As soon as I told you that, you were like, I'm done. I think that was a really good test. So there you go, you can, that's bragging rights, you can see you got the highest VO2 of anyone that's ever done this test since, and that's what, 4 years we've been doing this, almost. 10.1 final lactate, so let's see, 10.1. And heart rate's already down to 124 and dropping, VO2's way down to 17.2 from a max of 70.3. We've got it on record, that's awesome. Alright, I think that's enough data. Print that out. And then I'll take the mask off and get some water. It's a good test. Alright. Okay, you want to talk to Daryl?
Sure.
While you're all sweating. Oh, sorry. There we go.
What'd you think?
It's tough. It's a good workout. Having the mask on adds a little different component because you kind of get this claustrophobic feeling. But once you get used to it, you can kind of settle in and get into your pace until they start cranking up the incline on you.
New record, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah.
So how does it feel to be, what did you say, you're at 46?
I'm 44.
44?
Yeah.
And you just beat everybody's record.
Right.
Awesome.
Good.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
So are there other ways for us to measure or to calculate what oxygen consumption might be? Yes, we can do tests within the field. They're easier and cheaper for us to do because it doesn't require the high intensity of all of this equipment, and it doesn't require all of the training that is involved. It's a little bit easier to do. However, they are a lot less accurate. Some examples of these would be like the Rockport walk test, which is you walk a mile as quickly as possible and you measure your heart rate. And then there are charts for you to be able to compare what that heart rate is and what your estimated VO2 would be, or your estimated oxygen consumption. There's also a 1.5 mile run walk test in which you're just trying to run, or if you have to take periods of time to be able to walk in between. And it's literally just based on speed. So how long does it take you to go this 1.5 miles, trying to go as fast as you possibly can? And then it uses that time that it took to be able to complete that test in order to estimate what your oxygen consumption would be. There's also things like the 3-minute step test, in which you're stepping up and down on a 16.25 step for 3 minutes, and then you measure the heart rate. It works very similarly to what we saw in the Rockport walk test, in which you just take your heart rate and then you're going to compare it to charts to be able to see what your estimated oxygen consumption would be. And the idea behind those is that the lower the heart rate, the better the cardiorespiratory fitness that you would have. So these are all just ways to estimate oxygen consumption, though it is not actually measuring it like what we saw with the metabolic testing that we just watched. So how is it calculated? How do we calculate oxygen consumption? It really comes down to what's called the Fick equation. And this is an equation, if you are in the fitness field, I would highly suggest that you understand and probably know by heart, just because it comes up a lot when it comes to oxygen consumption. And what it is it's VO2 equals cardiac output times the content of oxygen in the arteries minus the content of oxygen in the veins. That's what those different meanings are. Remember, cardiac output is our stroke volume times our heart rate, right? And that stroke volume is the amount of blood that's leaving the heart in each heartbeat that we have. And then we multiply that by the heart rate in beats per minute to be able to get what that cardiac output is. Now, the content of oxygen is in the different blood vessels. So we have the A is for the artery and V is for the vein. So really what we're doing is we're looking at the difference between the oxygen content in the arteries, in the veins versus the arteries, which is also known as the AVO2 difference. AV for arterial venous, O2 difference, oxygen difference. That's another shorthanded way in which we say it. So it's cardiac output times the AVO2 difference. So VO2 max, so that's just what oxygen consumption is. It's for any given level of exercise. When we look at maximum amount of volume of oxygen consumption, that's the VO2 max, which is just that maximum ability for the cardiovascular system to be able to transport the oxygen to the muscles for use during extreme exercise. So maximum amount of exercise. It also requires that you are utilizing a large portion of your muscle mass. So it's not something that would be just done with like a bicep curl. Instead, you need to be using at least 50% of your muscle mass in order for it to be considered a VO2 max test. So taking a look at just what are the different realms of like what VO2, normal VO2 maxes would be. So this is just looking at it. These are in terms of absolute oxygen consumption, which is measured in liters per minute. This does not take into consideration body weight. So in order to take into consider your body weight and body mass, you now adjust it and make it a relative VO2, which is milliliters per kilogram per minute. And that's kind of what we talked about already, so that you can actually compare it to other people of similar body mass, or at least it takes the body mass into consideration. So absolute VO2 is just looking at, for that individual person, what their oxygen consumption level is, but it's not able to compare it to other people because it's not the relative VO2, which is when we switch it to milliliters per kilogram per minute. So taking a look at these relative numbers, because I feel like that is most often what is talked about when we are referencing what VO2 is. Resting VO2, you are always consuming oxygen because all of the cells in your body are working to keep you alive. So we actually do utilize oxygen even just at the resting state. And when you're at the resting state, everyone is right around a 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. When they're walking, it's usually around an 11.5. If it's a slow walk or a medium walk, like around 3 miles per hour, so it'd be at 11.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. When they start running at the miles per hour, 6 miles per hour, you are usually operating at around a VO2 oxygen consumption of 35.7 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Average, as far as maximum fitness goes, it's usually around 48 milliliters per kilograms per minute, and that is for males. We are looking at male numbers right now. Female numbers tend to be a little bit lower than that. Excellent fitness, if somebody is in excellent fitness, it would be around 60 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And then elite runners or elite athletes range somewhere above 75 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And these, again, are male numbers. Usually what ends up happening is around 50 milliliters or so would be a female elite fitness, and elite female athletes are usually around 60 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So those just kind of give you like, what are the different realms? Somebody who is sedentary might be like around early 30s, even less than that, of oxygen consumption in milliliters per kilogram per minute. So this is just taking a look at what those different ranges would be, and remembering that even at rest, we are always consuming oxygen. These numbers that you see that are METs right next to it, METs is a measurement that is converted from milliliters per kilogram per minute. So 1 MET equals 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And then these are just going up from there in that ratio. And METs are used more in the clinical setting as compared to the research setting. So oxygen consumption. This is another abbreviation or shorthand for cardiac output, because Q always means flow, and this is the flow to the cardiac because of the cardiac output. So QC is cardiac output, and again, we have this is our AVO2 difference, this content of oxygens in the arteries compared to what's in the veins. So that's just giving you our Fick equation again, but just looking at a slightly different way to annotate it. So when we look at oxygen consumption, absolute readings of oxygen consumption are listed in liters per minute. And that's what this will give you. It will give you liters per minute. Then we can take into consideration what their body mass is by dividing it by how many kilograms that person is. 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds. So if you need to, you know that for the conversions, since in the US, we largely use the empirical system instead of the metric system. But once we divide it by that body weight, then we get our relative VO2. And remember, our relative oxygen consumption at rest is 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute, and that equals 1 MET. Which this is basically what our basal resting metabolism is. And METs are what's normally used in more clinical settings compared to in research settings. But there's an easy way to convert back and forth between the two of them, because it is just the ratio of VO2, relative VO2 is 3.5 to 1 MET. And that's literally just the conversion that you have. Okay, so when we are talking about how hard somebody is working, compared to how much oxygen they are extracting from their muscles. So here's our work rate. So this is somebody who is exercising and performing on a bike, because it's measured in watts. And that's typically what the bikes are referenced as compared to like looking at miles per hour if you were on a treadmill, or grade as you were on a treadmill. So this is watts. So we're measuring it on a bike. And then this is their oxygen uptake. And it follows this line, this linear line, for absolutely every single person. Every single person, when they are performing at 100 watts, are going to be here right around the absolute value of 1 liter per minute of oxygen consumption. Same here with here. If you, me, anybody that's around you, Uncle Harry, whoever it is operating at 200 watts, is working out at 200 watts on the bike, they're going to be operating right around, I'd say maybe like a 2.7 liters per minute as far as oxygen consumption goes. What changes is how far up on this graph you can go. So everybody operates and consumes the same amount of oxygen for each work rate, but how much work you can actually do changes on your fitness level. So somebody who is sedentary will follow this exact same line as somebody who is an elite athlete, but here is where they might top off, and they can't go and work any more workload past a little bit more than 200 watts. And this would give us a relative VO2 of 30. So here's our relative VO2 is on this side right here, right? So somebody who is normally active, the average VO2 max might be around 45 milliliters per minute per kilogram, or milliliters per kilogram per minute. So right around here, if somebody is more conditioned and is a good athlete, again, these are male numbers, we're looking around here at around 53 milliliters per kilogram per minute in relative VO2, or our endurance elite athletes could get somewhere even up to about 85 milliliters per kilogram per minute. I will tell you, Steve Prefontaine, which is local hero here in Eugene, Oregon, he has a VO2 max, or when he was in his running prime condition, of 84 milliliters per kilogram per minute, which is astounding. That is a really top elite athlete. The highest that has ever been recorded has, I believe it's 99 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And what's distinguishable about this one is that it was a cross country skier, elite cross country skier, who was actually tested on Nordic track equipment for them to be able to be doing their sport of choice. So testing is always higher when you are being tested in the way that you are an athlete. So for instance, a runner tests best when they are tested on a treadmill. A cyclist tests best when they are tested on a bike. But if you take a runner and instead test them on the bike, it usually does not reach what their actual max is, but it does give us a peak number. And that's what we will call our VO2 peak, meaning that is the top number they reached. However, it's not necessarily a maximum because it wasn't in their specialty of sport. For the average person who maybe isn't a complete elite athlete, usually you will get your VO2 max best when it is on a treadmill, because it is utilizing more muscles traditionally compared to than when you are on a cycle. And more people are used to walking and running than they are to being on a bike. And so we find that we actually get better numbers when we are on a treadmill, unless your athlete, your sport of choice that you are an athlete in, happens to be something else. So this 99 milliliters per kilogram per minute was done with an elite athlete who was a cross country skier who also was tested on cross country skiing equipment. And so it used not just the lower body, but the arms as well, so that they could get their arms with the cross motions when they were cross country skiing. And that's the highest one that's ever been recorded, at least as of the last time that I looked at the research, which was not too long ago. As far as ranges go, so anything that is like just right about, it can go anywhere from just above 10 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And that's what we would find in a diseased individual. So somebody who has a cardiorespiratory disease that prevents them from either intaking oxygen, pumping oxygen around, or extracting oxygen from the muscles, could be considered disease, up to about usually around 85 milliliters per kilogram per minute in the elite athletes. Endurance athletes, just slightly below elite athletes, are usually around 75. And again, remember, these are for male numbers, not for female numbers. So we're going to stop here for this video and just kind of give you that brief introduction to what we had with oxygen consumption.